Except music videos is like the 90s.
Was there something you tweeted? What the heck?
No. So when I had this little like one. I didn't check my dragons. They could be hungry for all I know. It's taking long to load. I'd rather check my dragons. Check it out. Check that out. It's the Valentine's Day special, and the prizes this time are so good. Oh, I don't have internet. I have to write this. Just can't. What? Wow. God's college. You know Hitler fell into a river and then a priest saved him when he was a kid. And then, like, I think it was.
He's also a prisoner of war.
Yeah, because my freaking watches Oh, it's iced tea. Yeah, I love Law and Order. How can you not like Law and Order? That's I don't like Law and Order SVU. SVU is the best Law and Order. Yes. In the criminal justice sexual assaults. I used to know that whole opening. I know it. Now I don't remember.
Are considered particularly heinous.
In New York City, there's no legal, I don't know, law force, blah, 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 blah. I know, I used to know it, but I don't watch it anymore because the new seasons are shit. Ever since Olivia turned into a tangerine. She's so orange, I just can't take her seriously anymore.
Wait, I just watched this on the
You're going to have to edit that out.
What?
It's I've seen them like 5 times.
She's so orange though, I just can't. Plus, when they got rid of her partner, I was also like, Elliot, yeah, when Elliot left of the show, I was just like,
He's lost another show.
yeah, I know, he was in the movie for it too. It's good.
I know what it's about.
Check it out, I have a Cyclops dragon named Wings. Look at that egg. Look at that egg. 30 minutes, I tell you, he will be ready. Then I have a sun dragon coming on the way too. I have like some weird dragons. No. Okay. Baby's gonna die overnight. Though, you know, I had a really hard time when I was going to send Dan the unconscious, because I thought, he's either unconscious because he's dying, or he's unconscious because he hit his head. So if he dies on me throughout the night, I was just like, but he wasn't in my top 4 to be airlifted. The helicopter takes 4. And you know another thing about that shit, why do I have to decide who gets like airlifted? And then like, what if I'm hurt too? What if I put myself in the top 4 and just say bye? Push out the other people in water. I have 28 chance.
This is such a bad trip that I don't have to explain it. What? That's here, ready?
No, only Christian Morgan.
I just played the
Doesn't align to me. What's
so I have to use all these words and then incorporate them into that's pretty much all of our
All right, I guess I waited long enough to make sure everyone's here. We'll do the island activity, or the it's not an island activity anymore. It's like the charter plane, right? So that was the thing that was on your on the worksheet that I gave you guys. Just make sure you're trying to familiarize yourself with that early, so that you can kind of get right into the thing right towards the end of the period. I'll give you guys about 5 to 6 minutes to come up with your decision about who you want to save from that list. So you have to have agreement up to 7 survivors is kind of my curve on that. Now you're going to have a lot of disagreements, but you're going to try and get together on who are the 7 that you can agree on, and then maybe have a few that. How many can you save? I don't even remember the worksheet.
4 at a time.
You can only save 4 at a time. Okay, so you want to try and agree on 7 of them in those things there, and then you put them in that correct order. Who's going to be first? Who are you going to save first, second, third, etc. up to 7. So real quick, though, after we complete our warrants, our presuppositions, which I gave you guys a little bit of yesterday, we'll look at the different types of ethical knowings. I'll give you guys your blog activity, and then we'll go to that island rescue. Now, why do we do ethical reasoning? I think did I already talk about this one, or I skipped right through it? Ethics makes us clear why we act better than why a certain act is better than another. Okay, I already talked about that. So here are some basic warrants behind the presuppositions behind ethical reasoning. We have to assume that man is a rational being. We have to assume that man is free to make choices. If we don't have those basic suppositions, then the way in which we do ethical reasoning will vastly change. For instance, just take one of the most important systems of ethical reasoning, which is, well, I should ask you, what do you think is the most important formal system of ethical reasoning that we have in our society today?
Judiciary.
The judiciary. In particular, our justice system that determines whether you are guilty or innocent, right? Or guilty or not guilty, which is in itself an ethically reasoned presupposition. Why is it not guilty and innocent? Just as a quick tangent here. Why is it not guilty and innocent? Why is it guilty and not guilty in the judiciary? Have you ever thought about that? Why it is that they're not trying to determine your innocence necessarily? Or that we even start with the idea of innocent until proven what?
Guilty.
Guilty. But they don't say you're innocent, they say you're not guilty. Why is that?
Because they're only judging you on one instance, maybe?
So they're only judging you on that one particular crime or thought. Good, that's a start. But why don't they say, Your Honor, we find the defendant innocent? What is innocence? Define it.
White.
White?
Like I think of a little girl in like a white dress.
Oh, okay, a little girl in a white dress. First I thought you were a little racist there. I think of a white child.
Not a white child.
As in that white person is innocent, Your Honor.
Just like a little kid in like white.
No, I understand what you mean. And so innocence, like a child who has not a lot of experience, and then they're sort of naive to the world in a good way, right? Well, innocence in a court of law, what would that mean, and why is that a too high of a standard or too absolute of a term to be used in the judiciary or to the justice system? Have you ever thought about that? Let's think about it now. Yes?
I was going to say maybe it's because they see innocence as in someone that hasn't been introduced to any sort of evil yet.
Okay, yeah, but we're talking about the word innocent in a moral sense, sort of like in the belief system of like heaven and hell kind of thing. We're talking evil at that point. I'm talking about it in terms of justice, or in terms of right or wrong action, which we're going to talk about the division actually between morality and ethics in a second. Luis and then Troy.
Well, I guess
You'll be able to add your 2 cents.
I'm not a fan of this first.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you, Luis. You're a gentleman.
I don't
Troy.
like Luis, so. But I think like by saying guilty and not guilty, if they were to claim that the person being trialed is innocent, it kind of like it separates them from the action, and it's kind of like too good of a thing where like guilty and not guilty, like not guilty, they might have done something bad, but they're not necessarily breaking the law, or I don't know.
Okay, I see what you're sort of saying. You're saying that there might be a division between that idea of morality and ethics, which I have yet to discuss, but you're already sort of picking up on. That we think of innocence not in judiciary language, but more in a moral sense, like someone they might have done something wrong but didn't break the law sort of language. I don't think that's quite the case, but that is an interesting division. Yes?
Like, I think I kind of agree with what Troy said. Like, I think that maybe that when you're innocent, that means that like that you didn't do anything wrong. But when you're not guilty, it means you didn't do what they're looking for, what they thought you would have done.
Right, and let's make it a little bit more clear, because you're saying it's not that we weren't able to find what we were looking for in this case, which is when we say innocent, it is a judicial term, so it's not to say that we're looking at morality or whether you're a good or bad person. It's not like if we were to say you were innocent, it would be like saying that we defined the defendant a really good person and hope to marry my daughter someday. that wouldn't be the definition of innocence in a judicial language. Instead, it would be like you're innocent until proven guilty, meaning you're not going to suffer the punishments of the thing, because we can't just say that you did it and then make you have to prove your innocence. The idea of proving innocence would be like an absolutizing of the actual the crime or action in such a way as to be too high of a standard. In the same way, then, also, to have to prove one's innocence would be also kind of ill-suited to modern justice systems, because we understand that it's unreasonable to try and prove a negative. So, prove to me that a unicorn doesn't exist. Well, if my standard, if to say that a unicorn is innocent of existence, it would sort of be like you have to show me every animal on the planet, and then describe why it is that each animal is not a unicorn, etc. The standard would be too high. Instead, it's good enough just to say that one is not guilty, meaning we don't have enough evidence to show his guilt, meaning proving a positive that he committed the action. But again, all of those things presuppose that man is a rational being, that I can even decide on those things, and that man is free to make choices. Now, how would the justice system be different if we didn't believe one of these 2 basic assumptions? I'm thinking of number 2 in particular, that man is free to make choices. How does that change, for instance, our legal system regarding crimes and guilt and that sort of behavior? Yes?
And then people can plead insanity. I'm crazy, so I didn't do what I actually did. I wasn't cognizant.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of ways that we delineate between different types of insanities. Temporary insanities, temporary rage, these kinds of language that tend to diminish man's ability to make choices. And so it hopefully develops a lower culpability for one's ethical reasoning, or in many cases lack thereof, because people are horrible ethical agents oftentimes. They haven't thought about what they're doing, and either that or they're too stupid, or they're too morally abhorrent, so they like doing bad things to people, like doing bad things to themselves. And there's all sorts of systemic problems with that. But at the heart, if we can't do these two things, then we don't even do ethical reasoning. So just to let you know that is important. How might the goal and method of ethics change if one of those both of those suppositions were shown to be false? This goes at the heart of any and all ethical reasoning. If you were to tweak one of these two things, in fact, if you're going, so I know Arcs and Craig, and you guys all read it, and you all did your mesh puffs on it, so it's always in my head now. It's stuck. I want to see from your other classes too, because I want to get stuck in my head history and your engineering and all that. But if your characters or your genetically modified individuals can't do these kinds of free will decisions, if they're just biological sort of, they're at constant biological equilibrium with their surroundings or with their mates or with their society, then ethical reasoning for those, what are the blue guys called? The Krakers, right? Yeah, they don't have ethical reasoning, or at least they have to develop it through adaptation again, the same way we did maybe, if it becomes advantageous. But the whole point is that they don't need to do these things. Would it be good if we didn't have to do these things? We were all just sort of in an equilibrium like the Krakers? Everything was sort of, no? Okay, I don't know.
They're pretty happy.
Yeah, they seem pretty happy. They seem pretty weird and stupid, though, at the same time.
Your opinion?
I like my ethical autonomy, thank you very much. I don't want to be... But we'll talk about that with behaviorism and psychology, human sciences, etc. for a few weeks from now. So the objects of ethical reasoning, we have the doer of the action, which is the subject, in which he is sort of, from his perspective, his or her, I'm not being gender neutral, just that his, it's a literary device, his subjective experience, he is the one who does the actions, and then there is a formal object of ethics, which is the action, not the subject. So it's important to distinguish between ethical action and the subject by which one is performing. I think this was interesting because yesterday we got into a very interesting division of ethical principles or ethical reasoning that you didn't think existed, just in the simple statement of dog versus man, or dog versus boy, or something like that, or mom versus five, these kinds of things. And it got a little bit like, well, I can't believe you would do that, and no, I don't. How can you hate your mom, and all this kind of stuff. And I think what I want to remind you of is that your ethical actions are not you, and it's important to know that when you're in certain situations, especially, which are constructed perfectly to build on and heighten this moral dilemma. That is merely showing the ethical reasoning. It doesn't necessarily show your moral character. It's not trying to say that one person is a good person or one person is a bad person. Very important when talking about ethical reasoning. That there is a distinction here between the formal object and the subject of ethical character. So when you are having to make choices that are very difficult, it's very easy to judge people in those situations. Now, would it be in a perfect world you could save both the dog and the boy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now
the
you would
dog
be,
and the boy wouldn't even there.
and then you would. So you could call any and all of you moral as a result of your intuition and your desire to save both. You would be immoral if you actually liked the idea of the dog being killed, or vice versa. Even though you would save one or the other or have some sort of ethical reasoning, you would in fact be immoral. It is possible to be ethically rational and very immoral, and vice versa. It is possible to be very moral and be very ethically irrational, meaning you don't know why it is that you're doing the right actions, even if you have good intention or you have you want to help everybody. And in fact, it's the idea of, like, what's the cliche? What's the statement there? The path of destruction. Is it path of destruction is paved with good intentions? Have you ever heard that phrase? So, like, people who are moral people, but they make bad ethical decisions. They want to help people, but they don't know how to do it. And so then they choose wrong things, or they choose wrong behaviors. This is important. So ethical reasoning is its own category of philosophy. I mentioned consequentialist or teleological ethics, ethics that have an ends to themselves, a purpose and a design, versus non-consequentialist or deontological. ethics. That the duty, the imperative to do the right action is the action itself is the ethical goodness. One says that there's goodness in and of itself, and one says that it is good insofar as it creates greatest utility, or the right ending. No matter what you try to find with other types of divisions, these are the two central ones in philosophy. So we didn't write this down yesterday, do so now. There are various subtitles of consequentialist ethics. The one that John Stuart Mill is a part of is called what? Anyone know? It starts with the U. What? There you go. Utilitarianism. I thought I heard someone say it over there. Yeah, thank you, Hunter. Very good. Utilitarianism. That the utility of society, it's a social contract. So that's a whole other thing. You can talk about your own individual subject of an ethical agent or ethical reasoning. And then you can talk about how societies have to structure themselves. Think about how, our judicial branch has to kind of figure out what are the laws that are going to govern everyone, even if individuals disagree with it. One of the questions they give you on jury selection is, if there is a law that you personally disagree with, can you set aside that disagreement and still uphold the law for the sake of society? So that's an interesting question. If you say, I personally disagree with this law, so I can't prosecute someone based on it, you would be a bad ethical reasoner on a jury, because your job isn't to determine what is lawful and what is not. Your job is to enforce and determine whether or not the law is correctly applied to that person's actions, if he in fact broke the law. So that's an important distinction, and we have to subvert ourselves to that society in order to live in it. That's what we all do. Social contract. So utilitarianism actually says something along those lines. Like we all subvert our own sort of ethical nature in order to maximize happiness. If I want to do something that makes me happy, that utility needs to be within the context of everyone else's happiness. So if I'm doing something that I know will decrease overall happiness, that would be a bad thing. Of course, there's all sorts of questions you can ask of that, like what? What are some ways in which you would challenge something like maximum happiness as a way of structuring society? What are some basic definitional questions that you'd want to ask before we even have that kind of conversation? Let's think critically for a second.
What does make you happy?
What does make you happy? Okay, so, and does that change by person to person? Happiness.
Yeah.
Okay, so this might be a more subjective reality than we realize. Yes?
What is happiness and how can you get the maximum amount of it?
Yeah, what does it look like to actually quantify happiness? And not only that, but what is happiness, as we just mentioned, but quantifying it. How much? What are we talking about? Weight? Are we talking about people who survey qualitatively that they in fact are happy and they're happier than they would be if you didn't do that particular action? It seems kind of weird to determine maximum happiness in individual cases. What else?
This is like, why is being happy the moral thing to do?
And you're kind of hitting on the very basic division at that point between the two. If we are to determine that the happy thing, or the thing that makes happiness, is in fact the right thing to do, you're sounding more like a deontologist, someone who believes in non-consequentials. Because at the basic level, the action itself, why should I do that action? Even if it does or does not maximize happiness, why do I have an obligation to maximize happiness? Do I not have an obligation to something other than happiness, such as like freedom? I have an obligation to promote my own freedom. How is that different than happiness? To promote my own freedom. Well, my freedom might cause you to be a little bit less happy, but it is my freedom that's more important than your happiness, or your safety, or whatever, your autonomy. I can control you. These are all questions of the division between the two, and highlights the two. So look at John Stuart Mill. Make sure that you understand his situation, his discussions, and then also the counter-arguments for his position. And then look at Immanuel Kant, who does this sort of thing. For Immanuel Kant, it would be wrong to... So we can also talk about the... So I already mentioned the weaknesses of utilitarianism. There's a couple of other ones. If I were to, for instance, say that my happiness in doing some action, if it maximized my happiness so much that it, in effect, offset the global loss of happiness, then this action could be considered moral, because this particular action makes me really happy, even if it makes many people slightly less happy. And so we get a utilitarian sense of ethics, for instance, when we have very wealthy people in control of a lot of power. This is an example of, when they have a lot of power, they have a maximized happiness that might be actually greater than 90% of everyone else. Their happiness is greater than the rest. Now, I'm not trying to be all Occupy Wall Street on you. It's just to suggest that the idea of utilitarianism applied to particular situations of inequality and other kinds of situations can arise as difficulties in applying that system. So then, looking at deontology, then we should look at moral duty. That is, I have an obligation to do right actions because I would want other people to do these right actions as well. If everyone were to do this action, it would be a rational place to live, and therefore I should do it. I am morally obliged to do it. Give you an example. You're in Nazi Germany. I know it's easy to go to the Nazis for all these moral dilemmas. But you're in Nazi Germany, and you are a good person. You're a good German. Not a good German in the sense of the Nazis' definition of good German. You're a moral person who is German. And as such, you have several Jewish friends that you have hidden in your house. Now, the Nazis come knocking on the door. It's that day, Christmas, where they came in, or Hanukkah. There was like a main day where they came to see. It was like during the Day of Atonement, some horrible, they knocked on the door, and I should probably edit that out now. But seriously, they're jerks. So they knock on the door and they say, where is your Jewish friends that you are hiding? We know you are hiding them. Now, what do you say? What do you do?
I don't know what you're talking about.
What? Nine? Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Me? Heinz? Franz? Oh. We don't do that. No, you would lie, right? Now, for Kant, so for Immanuel Kant, who believes in ethical moral duties, and that everyone were to do this action would result in being rational. If we were to take deontology at its sort of literal, most basic definition, what would we have been doing to the Nazis just then? If we say no, we don't know what you're talking about. We do not have any Jewish friends in our basement. Yes.
Well, we're lying, and a deontologist might see that as just morally wrong.
So a deontologist would see that as morally wrong, because if everyone lied, then it would be in an irrational place to live. You can't have everyone lying to everyone else. We couldn't make sense of the world. Math teachers would be telling you that 2 + 2 = 10. It would just be a horrible, chaotic place. So you have a moral, ethical duty to tell the Nazi the truth. Now, they've since, of course, they don't just say, well, that's it, I guess we can't do anything about it. We can't be deontologists and lie ever. They would say something like, well, contextually, in that particular situation, the moral imperative is to lie to the Nazis. And that the contextual thing is that if everyone were to do this action, that is, if everyone were in a position where they had to defend a friend over and against an enemy combatant who's asking for them, then the rational thing to do would be to lie, or the moral imperative would be to lie. But that's a bit of a qualifier on top of what otherwise is a pretty simplistic argument that you have a categorical imperative. You have some real obligation, a moral oughtness to do an action in and of itself, whether it maximizes happiness or not. And he would in fact say so very clearly, the idea that even if it hurts somebody, you still have an obligation to do an action that you know is right, even if you know the consequences are going to be bad. So you can see the dilemma between the two, can't you? That they don't seem to be perfectly rendered, and usually people respond with some type of intermediary between the two, or constant contextualized ethics as they come up. You guys have all sorts of other issues like proximity, like how much time I have, or how much how much affiliation I have, with them regarding how much I place on intelligence or sapience, or these other kinds of important issues regarding my ethical decisions. Because ultimately, we have to deal with both an internal sense of ethical compassing or ethical direction, and an external sense of ethical reasoning. When I place it in an external sense, I have problems like how much money I have. And I have problems with how much time I have. And that affects my ethical reasoning. At the same time, internally, I have issues about my loyalty or my affiliation. These are all important as well. How many of you have given money to starving children in Africa this week? Did you really? No way. Well, Luis is so special, aren't you? Yes, I'm so glad someone asked one.
ASPCA.
Oh, okay, good. So if you haven't, are you an immoral person?
No.
Are you unethical? Or is it just that you haven't thought about it? Or you don't think that that's required to do every week in order to be ethical? Or you gave all you needed at one point? Or you only gave the amount that you're going to give this year because it's a tax write-off? Or you're going to give just that much because you have other things to do that are equally important of your time and resources? How many of you have given like literally all your paycheck? How many guys, any of you work? Oh. I make money too. I don't give all my money to charity. Am I a horrible person?
No.
No. Why?
Because you have to survive, you have kids at home.
So I have other obligations, right? And so I can't save the world. I probably won't be able to save the world even if I gave all my paycheck all the time. So that's a consideration when we talk about these ideas. External ethical reasoning are actions that are a result of cultural, societal, religious, and political evolution of group identity. One does the right action in order to belong. So some of the things I said just now, like I give to charity because it's a tax write-off. That is, it offsets some taxes. I can claim it as a deduction on my taxes and get some money back for my taxes that offset it, the charity. That would be an example of an external ethical reasoning. Did it diminish the action, knowing that I did it just to belong in society? Well, we might be talking more about one's morals than their ethical reasoning, because it is true that they gave money to the correct charity, and it just so happens that they did it with an incorrect moral duty, or let's not be that harsh, because of external ethical reasoning. They are belonging to a society. Internal ethical reasoning would be something like virtue ethics, as Plato called it. Plato had a very interesting ethical sort of system in place regarding society, but in connection to individuals like yourselves. He viewed all of you, you IB juniors, so I don't know if it's going to call you seniors, IB juniors, almost seniors, as the guardians of democracy. He actually called them guardians, people who went to school to learn philosophy. In this room, you guys are the only people out of thousands at this school who will become the guardians of democracy according to Plato, because you actually care enough to think about ethical reasoning. Something as basic as what's right and wrong and why. What duty do I have to that ethical need of maximizing happiness or of the moral imperative? In the same case, also, you're going to live lives of humble servitude to knowledge and to upholding the general sort of good of education and learning and its correct application in the world. You would have been a guardian of these virtue ethics. To do right actions because one must have right ethical character. What other reasons would one want to do right in this category? One reason could be, well, there's all sorts of reasons why you want to have an internal virtue ethic. Many of you have religious beliefs. That could be a major part of internal virtual ethics or virtue ethics. You might have people that you're trying to change or manipulate. Manipulate's a bad word. You're trying to show your girlfriend on Valentine's Day that you really are Rico Suave in the greatest, nicest way possible. So virtue ethics help you with that. You start crying at the movie, when the dog dies, just to show. But I mean, you might really be crying, but you know it's going to give you extra points. And how does this relate to society then? Couple of quick thoughts on both your topic of your Argue It Out as well as kind of what I think about during February, since it is sort of Black History Month, and the discussions just from a few weeks back with Martin Luther King, and then we have President's Day. All these kinds of things kind of come up in February. Civil rights movement was an interesting time of kind of breaking down the barriers of what people thought maximized happiness. There was at one point in our society where maximizing happiness meant segregating the races, right? Separate but what?
Equal.
Separate but equal. Now, was that true? Was that a correct ethical reasoning? It doesn't seem like it is from today's standards. But it is technically possible, if you're thinking about the greatest of all worlds, to have separate races that are equivalent in power and in influence and in money, but it seems to never ever get to that because of the way that the generational poverty and issues of racism and things diminished one particular group. And so you can see it just very clearly here that one is the standard and the other is the afterthought, isn't it? So this was a problem. And then all sorts of other issues that were unethical. And so it was important to consider the perspective of those who wanted to uphold the status quo versus those who wanted to change the society. And how do they do it? What are sort of the implications of these kinds of behaviors? Are they giving us ethical positions on separate but equal? Or is there something else, more of an internal ethical reasoning going on, a virtue ethic going on? That, in fact, these people are concerned that there's some sort of degradation to themselves by going to school with Negroes. We can instantly think horrible people, right? And at the same time, we can think of them from an ethical standpoint. Well, what are they trying to accomplish? Are they trying to maximize their happiness? They're children. Okay? How have they learned this behavior? What sorts of things can we do to fix the situation and still maintain dignity of those whom we disagree with? And if you can get that mindset about any and all topics that you agree and disagree, even in today's battles or fights in ethical reasoning, you'll be in a much better place, better suited to engage the culture in that regard. To not throw hate to hate kind of thing, because your ethical obligation beyond the idea of hate or fighting fire with fire is exactly what we're talking about with the divisions of ethical reasoning, deontology versus consequentialist. They both require you to consider how you are actually going to improve the situation. And so what we see here in this particular chart is the external ethical reasoning over the course of time. And so this is just one example of many in which you can apply that TOK principle of ethical reasoning to situations. In this case, I'm talking about sort of public or external ethical reasoning in a way that over society we can see how ethics have changed of what we thought was right and wrong to do over the course of time. So we can see how the benefits of that percent of black and majority white schools in the South between 1954 and 2003. And there's all sorts of other fun things you can tease out of this data, but we're going to leave it at that. At the same point, there's also an interesting marriage debate. Even today, recently in Alabama, there was a conversation about gay marriage and that constant struggle for marriage equality even today. Do you approve or disapprove of marriage between blacks and whites? Over the course of time, the ethical reasoning has changed. It's diminished as a literally a inverse sort of chart, whatever that means. I don't know, inverse something, right? Between the positions of the opinions, and the two are correlated to each other depending on the time period. And so over time, we can see ethical changes to society. And this is an interesting avenue to talk about history, to talk about one's ethical reasoning. Why is it that it becomes less justified versus more justified? Lastly, to do a quick word about your argue it out, which I know you guys all did different topics or different thoughts on. Did I give you time? Have I given you time to talk about those in class yet this week? Thursday. I want you to be ready to talk about your argue it out. And you can start thinking about it from this ethical standpoint as well. But if you had something about violence, culture, and identity, have it in, bring it in. Tell us a little bit about your thesis, and we'll do that on Thursday. But just as a thought here, this is a chart on gun ownership versus gun deaths. And it seems that as gun ownership goes up, in areas that have least gun restrictions, gun deaths go up. Obviously, there's a correlation between the two, and it's incomplete. But violence, culture, and identity, and ethical reasoning, how we structure societies to maximize happiness, is an important idea. I can show you easily a chart that shows about defensive use of gun death and the idea of using guns to protect yourself as well. So I don't want you to feel like this is just sort of me hating on guns. I don't. Not in this way. But what we do in society is important and matters, and the way that we talk about guilt and innocence and not guilty matters, because ethical reasoning, what might protect you from going to jail unlawfully or being segregated unlawfully or protecting you over against somebody else's idea of freedom, because we don't talk about that kind of terms as much. We talk about how we are to maximize happiness or do the right moral ought, the higher thing. And this is how we sort of bind each other in society. All right. I don't have time to get into much else. You have a couple minutes here. What I want you to do is look at that worksheet together very, very quickly, in like maybe 2 minutes. Decide on at least 2 people that you think absolutely should go first on your charter plane. So go pull that up right now, and then decide on those 2 people. We'll decide on the rest first thing Thursday, and then we'll do our argued outs, and then we can leave Thursday to discussion. I'll show you some alternative moral agents, though, from popular film and art. People who challenge our moral intuitions. Go.
I already picked who I thought
Jared, who is the most important to save?
Maria, because she's pregnant. Then I picked Andres.
But if there was your dog to tell you.
No, my dog is a flesh, like fish or something. I don't know. Probably useful. Then Abigail. Yeah, but I mean, if someone tries to attack me, bye-bye. I chose Maria, Andres, Abigail, John, Dan, Jose, Alfredo, Nicole, Samantha, Evelyn, Richard, and Tim.
It's a plane crash.
Yeah.
See, the dad and the son are really good. Remember, like the first four and the next four is the last one.
So,
I would say.
how's that going to feel in your conscience?
I think Jose should move up to my first four though, because he has a lot of blood loss. But he's in my second four because he's a really
I didn't read that. I didn't read the 18. She might need to say.
The Ace and B-roll is in my last. What do you guys think?
I should have read the 18.
So that's 30 seconds. So we can't come up with a consensus as to T, no to disagreement, and then bring it to our discussion tomorrow, or on Thursday, excuse me.
They're also my second one, because I don't really care.
You are free to go in those 30 seconds.
Because she just has a deep laceration. It's not like Jose who's suffering from blood loss. And she doesn't have shock. It's just bruised bits and the laceration. Tin is last. He said he's fine.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just philosophy of psychology. By saying that Tim has a concussion, but otherwise he's fine, you think Tim's okay. I'm not going to send him up. Wow. She's not. It's 3 days before the next No, it's 3 days between each weekend.
No, it's not. It's every other.